In this video, we're going to be going over an introduction to JavaScript. What is JavaScript? Well, JavaScript is a programming language used to make web pages interactive, and we're going to use this little example to go over some of the basics of JavaScript. So let's get started today. And I've got prepared in Visual Studio Code 6 files, or 7 files, one with notes. I've got 3 files for the sandbox that we're going to work in, and then 3 files for the solution, and then a 7th file that's the notes right here for just some colors. And we can start with the HTML, and to get started, we're going to do Shift !tab, and then we're going to give this a title of FAQ toggle. And so, in this tutorial, we're going to be building a frequently asked questions toggle just to get some ideas of, how JavaScript works and, go over some of the basics. So we can get started with adding a heading. So we have, essentially 2 elements. We got a heading with an ID of question, and that's going to be what is JavaScript. And then we have a paragraph with an ID of answer, and that's going to be a programming language used to make web pages interactive. Okay, so that's our HTML. And then the next step is to link to our CSS and link to our JavaScript, our external files that we have here. So we can do that. We can start with the link tag, and we can say href sandbox relationship style sheet. And for JavaScript, to link to an external JavaScript file, we're going to say script, and then we're going to say source equals sandbox.js, like so. So we're all linked up, and we can now get started in those files. I will mention with JavaScript, and if we go here, we've got what is JavaScript, programming language used to make web pages interactive. First I want to mention is, if you are linking to an external style sheet and you wanted to, let's say, you can't be doing this as well. You can't say like, hello world. So you can't have an internal script on top of an external script. So you can't use like one of these for multiple. It's not going to work. So, if we inspect the page, nothing shows. If we remove source, you will see it shows up, hello world, like so. So it's really one or the other. You can, add scripts to an HTML file, but preferably you're just going to put that in its own external sheet. Okay. The other thing too is generally you're going to want to add it at the end or right before the closing body tag, and that's just to wait for all of the HTML to first load, the page to load, and then you run any scripts you have from JavaScript. So that's just something to keep in mind. Next, we're going to add some styles, just some basic styles, just to get us where we are at with the final solution. And we can add height, 100 viewport height. We want to use flex to put this essentially these 2 elements in the center, and we want to say, hey, flex direction, let's make it a column, and we want to align items center. I'll mention here, since we're switching flex direction column, you'll need to use align items to center from left to right versus justify content, because it's a column and not a row. And you'll see that in the browser here. It's now centered. And let's fix the text. Okay. And we can now, style a bit more of, the question and answer. So we've got question. You want to reference it by the ID of question. We can say, hey, when we hover over this, we want to use a pointer, cursor. We want the color, and we can grab that from here. We want the color for the question to be this like purple, and then we want to say, hey, let's give it an underline for decoration. So that's the question. Then we want the answer and that's going to be, we're going to display that as none. So at the start, as you can see in the solution, it's not there at the start, and we're going to reveal it with JavaScript. So we're going to say display none for the answer. We're going to say margin top 5 pixels just to give it some space, and we're going to give it a color of this gray, this over here. Okay. And now, so that's all set up. Now we can go ahead and hop into the JavaScript. So we've just done the styles. Now let's get into the JavaScript. Now we're gonna, write this out, and then we can go through it, break down what it means. Well, we're gonna use const. You can use for variables. In JavaScript, you have variables that store data, and you can use const or let. By default, you can just aim to use const if you plan to have, a variable that plans on changing, like a counter. You can use let because that variable can change. So let when the value is going to be changing. Otherwise, just use const. And we say const question. We're giving it, hey, we want to give this variable the name of question, and then we want to get the question from the HTML. So we're saying document dot get element by ID, and we're going to take the question. We've given it a question ID, so we use the ID for CSS for styles, and we're also using it for JavaScript. So get the element by ID. This is going to be a method of document. Document is an object, and it has all sorts of properties, and one of those properties is get element by ID, which is a method that we can use, and we just add the question ID there. Next, we want to grab the answer. So pretty similar. It's going to be document.get element by ID, and we're going to capture the answer. So it's now on the JavaScript side of things. We've captured these and stored it in a variable, and then we can go ahead and say, hey, question dot add event listener. We're saying, hey, when we click on the question, when an event of click is registered in the browser, we want to reveal the answer. And so that's what we're building here. We're using an arrow function, and we're going to say if answer.style.display is equivalent to block, then answer.style.display equals none. Else, we can say answer.style.display equals block. So, block means that it's visible, and so if it's visible, when you click on it, it's going to hide answer. Otherwise, show answer when it's on a click. And so that's what we're doing. Okay, and now if we go to our sandbox and click, you'll see that on the click, the text displays. So want to cover this a little bit more in depth. So essentially, in JavaScript, you have objects that hold properties, and some of those properties include methods or special abilities, special actions you can do. One of those is get element by ID for document, and then you have other types of objects as well. These objects, question is an HTML element, and this falls under an event target. So add event listener is a method that question the HTML element can use, and that comes from this constructor that's called event target. So essentially there are, you've got HTML element, then you've got the element, you've got the node, and then you've got event target, and then above event target you've got the object, and then above object you've got null. So and I could write that out. So you have HTML. Essentially we got like a prototype chain is what we have here. So HTML element, and then we have, well, we can put this in notes. Let's do that. Let's put this in notes here. So you have HTML element, you have element, you have node, you have event target, you have object, and you have null. So essentially, event target gives, children, the ability to inherit special abilities from event target. Event target's built into the browser, and this question is able to inherit the ability of this add event listener, which is a method or an action that it can use. And so that's where that's coming from event target. And then there's a bigger class or a constructor or a class of object, but event target's a constructor that is like a function. And that's where that event listener comes from. And then click is the event that is known in the browser. And then we're using an arrow function. This is just another way to write a function of performing an action after the click happens. And so that's what happens here. And then you'll see here, as I mentioned, document gets its own methods. Get element by ID, which is specific to document that it can use. And so just want to mention the prototype chain, I think is something good to know about. Where does all this come from? So JavaScript is a collection of essentially like objects, object-oriented programming, and you're using or inheriting special abilities from the higher up tiers that are built into the browser. And so that's what that looks like. It's similar to, in a way, to like a linked list, if you're familiar with that. So that's essentially what's happening conceptually is like a linked list. And then this event target, so constructors, event target's a constructor. Constructors generally, now with some syntactic sugar, that becomes a class. And classes make objects. Event target isn't directly really creating objects, but its main benefit is allowing different objects down below to inherit the abilities of event target, which is the event capabilities that event target offers. So just wanted to mention that with how this is all working. And so the idea I think I want to wrap up with is just really that JavaScript is consisting of objects that have properties, that have methods with special abilities, and also just different characteristics that make each one unique. You've got in the browser you've got the window, and then within the window you've got the document, and within the document you've got all the HTML elements, you've got the text, different nodes, and it's in the form of the document object model in a form of a tree. So you've got different nodes that you can manipulate. And so with JavaScript, to wrap up, is a programming language used to make web pages interactive on top of the HTML and CSS that you're doing, and it's really cool to get into. So in the future, in more videos, we're going to be going into this in more in depth, but wanted to just kind of highlight a little bit and do my best to explain just generally get an idea of what JavaScript is, and we'll work to do more projects in the future. So hope you enjoyed, hope you found that useful, and thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.